I'm Jan Judy. I'm going to be giving a talk today on multi-species grazing. My wife Jan and I, we farm in central Missouri. It's called North Central Missouri. We're actually halfway between Kansas City and St. Louis. We got started on this journey probably close to 30 years ago. I wrote my first book in 2001. It was called No Risk Ranching. And what we were doing, folks, I started out, I listened to all the professionals and bought the land, bought the livestock, bought the equipment, and things weren't going very good for me. I was following what the professionals were doing, but at the end of the year, there wasn't any money left. And so I figured it out that there had to be a better way of farming, grazing, whatever. And so we started, I read an article, and the article was your sole purpose in life should not be to own the land, but to control the land. And that really lit a light bulb up in my little brain. And so we started leasing. We started leasing land. And we took old, worn-out farms. I got our first lease in 1999. And things kind of took off from there. We started getting more land. What we found out, folks, is when you're in the land leasing business, you're also in the land beautification business. Make them look nice, and other properties will start coming to you. That's what's happened to us. And so we needed livestock. When we first started, folks, we didn't have any money. I mean, we literally didn't have any money, and so we couldn't buy livestock. So we started custom grazing. So we were paid so much a day to run other people's cattle, and we did horses, did a few sheep, but mainly it was horses and cattle. And so we would take on these animals. They'd come to our lease farm, and we would manage them, and then we would get a check. We would get a check at the end of every month. Tremendous cash flow. So you're getting a check every month. So if you own animals, and let's say you're in the cow-calf business, you sell calves in the fall, you get one check, okay? And you're going to have some cull cows you'll be selling along, but with custom grazing, there was a check every month. And so Jan and I started to save our money. And we started buying our own herd. And today we no longer custom graze, but we didn't have to go to the bank. So we used other people's land, other people's livestock, and other people's money to generate our cash flow and get us in a position where we can start buying some of these animals. So I'm real big on owning animals, not a lot of equipment. And that's because how many tractors do you see out there that have baby calves? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And, the way I look at it, if you can save every penny you've got, if you're just starting out, you young folks out there, save your dollars. Add those things up. Buy your first cow or your first sheep or your first goats or whatever. Let those things start propagating on your land. Keep the best ones. And you'll be surprised in 10 years where you're at. If it eats the green blade of grass, you're always going to come out. If it eats the green blade of grass, you're always going to come out. So with these leased farms, started bringing in animals, and we had a lot of weeds. We didn't have a tractor. We didn't have a brush hog. And the farms that we were getting were worn out. So they were farms that somebody would have either tilled until it wouldn't produce a crop anymore, or it was land that somebody was baling hay off of. Just they baled hay, they never put any fertilizer on it. We call it bankrupt the soil, and then they walked away. Or we got land that had a lot of brush on it. Well, we knew how to build a fence, and we knew what animals could do when you start rotating animals. So we brought the two animals in together. We're all about diversity and bringing more species onto our farm. Remember this, folks. For every species that you can attract onto your farm, it supports 8 additional ones. Okay, I don't care if it's a bobcat, a white-tailed deer, a wild turkey, or a centipede, or an earth. I don't care. I want more diversity. Think of your farm as a spider web of life. And so we're talking about cattle and sheep today. Those are the two that I'm going to stay focused on pretty much, and I'll show some pictures of other things, but cattle and sheep eat differently. The cattle are more grass eaters, okay, and they'll eat clover as well, but sheep are broadleaf eaters. And broadleaf meaning weeds, multiflora rose bushes, thorn trees, autumn olives, all this junk that's trying to take over our pastures that you've got to go out there every year and brush hog or to take your farm over. Well, not if you have sheep. So I hate sitting on a tractor. I hate brush hog, and I absolutely despise it because I feel like I'm losing money. I'm burning fossil fuel. And with sheep, if I can harvest that leaf, I'm growing a baby lamb that I can sell, in 16 weeks or whatever. It's just a great deal. The other thing they do is they act as hosts for each other. So the sheep parasite can be ingested by the cow, and that's a dead-end host. They can't reproduce. And the cow parasite by the sheep and the sheep by the cow. So they're doing this. They're propping each other up. That's what they're doing. They're actually acting as vacuum cleaners for each other's parasites. So that's a win-win. If you run sheep and goats together, that's not a good deal as far as this, because they both share the same parasite. It's a good way to kill goats. Sheep, we have found, are just a lot easier to get parasite resistant. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. So you don't have to worm them. Folks, if you get the right kind of sheep and treat them right, get the right rotation, and focus on giving it enough recovery period in between grazings so you're coming back at the right time, and keep the sheep that can survive on your farm without worming. So we call it kicking the crutch out. Kick the crutch out, see which ones make it. And the ones that get wormy get a dirty tail. They don't breed. They stay thin. Get rid of them. Don't get them up and worm them. Well, if you worm them, sell them, but don't put them back in your flock because they're going to do it to you again in probably 35 to 60 days. You'll be after getting them up again. They're thin. They're spreading worms. They're spreading parasites all over your pasture, and they're infecting your good sheep. Get them out of there. Don't name your sheep. And that goes for cows too, folks. Don't name your cows. Yeah, I know it's tough for a small homesteader. It's fine if you can take it, but just remember they got to go if they don't work. They do. You either got to eat them, put them in the freezer, or get rid of them. We've trained our sheep to one poly braid. We had them at that for many years, and we brought goats on, and our goats trained them. Now we got to use two. It's kind of got me upset, but we're going to get them. We got rid of the goats. So the way I look at it, if you come onto my farm, if you won't stay in, we had 3 poly wires with posts every 5 feet, giving them a nice sward of grass and forage and brush, and they still got out. I'm like, you're gone. You're gone. We were putting posts every 5 feet, 8,000 volts in the wire, and I saw them go through it like pouring water through a fence. So you got to know when you're pick your battles, and when you're defeated, move on. We have a lot of brushy areas on our farms. So we went in and we're developing silvopasture in these areas. So we go in and we cut the trees out. How many trees do we cut out? It depends on the forest. If it's a really unmanaged set of timber, we'll go in and I always tie a ribbon or I'll spray paint the trees that I want to keep. Don't go out and start thinning your trees with a chainsaw in your hand, because you're going to cut some trees you shouldn't have cut. And before you know it, you're like, wait a minute, I didn't leave any. No, you don't do that. Leave the chainsaw at the house, go out and mark the trees, and what you're doing is you're looking for your nicest trees that have the nicest stem sticking up. Stem being branches going out on all 4 sides of that tree. And if you've got a tree that's growing into another one and it's kind of bending like that, that's a tree that needs to come out. So if we would do a better job of managing our timber on our farms, instead of getting one log cutting, let's say every 15 to 20 years, you can get a log cutting every 7 years. And each time you do that log cutting, the trees you've got remaining are getting better and better and better. And animals and trees, they destroy the land. No, they don't. They do if you leave them in there. If you leave cattle in forest, they absolutely will destroy it. They will. They'll eat every leaf. Their hooves will get down to the ground and chip the roots on the trees. They'll actually rub the bark off the trees. They'll eat all the acorns. You have no acorns left for your deer and turkey. And acorns are not a good forage for cattle in the fall. Sheep, they can kind of take them pretty good, but be careful. When green acorns fall on the ground in the fall, early fall, they're green, and you've got cow-calf pairs, and you don't have that timber fenced off, there's a couple great big oak trees out there, and those young calves, let's say they're born in the spring, so they're going to be 5-6 months old. They don't know any better. They'll go out there and they'll start eating those things, and they'll sound like a bunch of hogs eating corn. It'll kill them. It'll kill a young calf. Fence them off. Don't let them down in the timber in the fall. Now, once the acorns turn brown, I've never lost a calf on a woods where there's brown acorns. But, I'm a deer hunter, and I sell deer hunts. In Missouri, I think it's this way about anywhere in the States, you can sell a right to hunt a deer. You can't actually sell that deer, but you can sell a right. And folks, people are stupid about deer. They'll give a lot of money at a chance to shoot a deer with a big rack. Sell it. Sell it to them. It's called harvesting energy at a different level. So now you've moved up here on the brush because deer are browsers. And sheep are browsers. Sheep are not really a grazer, they're more of a browser. If you watch a sheep eat, they eat a lot like a deer. And goats eat a lot like a deer. So we raise really nice deer, and the way we look at it is if our management can produce a really nice deer, why not get $5,000 or $6,000 for that deer? Or a chance for somebody, and they may not get it. But we have trail cams out. They can see that they're out there. Same way on turkey hunting. We've got turkey now on every single farm. Why are the turkeys on our farm? It's because of that cow mob and those sheep. Our soils, folks, we had a grazing school in May. There's a couple of you all came. And somebody made the comment, Greg, we walked onto your pastures. It was like walking on a peat moss. It wasn't like walking on a concrete floor. And that's because we've trampled so much carbon over the years that our soil now is just alive with earthworms and microbes. We've got the mycorrhizal fungi going on. I mean, we don't use any chemical fertilizers, nothing. Just the animal. Somebody asked Ian, he said, what's the best thing to plant? And Ian, let me back up. Y'all don't know who Ian is. Okay. Ian Mitchell-Ennis, he's the South African rancher that I met back in 2007. And Ian helps us with our grazing schools now every year. He's got a 14,000-acre ranch in Africa. They run about 6,000 cows in one herd. And his soil is unbelievable. But he's got a 6,000 horsepower engine. Ian says the bigger the mob that you can put together. So if you have 5 acres and you've got 5 sheep, folks, if you can concentrate those enough where you can get enough time, that's what you're looking to get is time. You've got to get a rest period on your farm. If you get around too quickly on smaller acreage, what will happen is those parasites are just hatching out when you get back around. And now you've reinfected your sheep. Same way on cattle. So how do you know if a plant's recovered or not? Look at the tip of the grass. If the grass has got a sharp point on it, you know it's recovered. If it's blunt on the end, you got around too quickly. You got around too fast. And now that's called eating your seed corn. You're not going to have anything to graze on the next rotation because you're actually taking nutrients now out of the soil, out of the roots. You don't want to use the roots to push the plant back up. You want to use solar collector. So our theory is graze the top third. Graze the top third of the plant and move them. Now, there's a lot of different philosophies. Other than that, you hear and I don't want to get into all that, but I'm going to tell you this. It's working. The top third of the plant has more energy in it because it's closer to the sunlight. And so if you leave 2/3 of the plant intact, what's going to happen to you when you come back? Well, it's going to grow back faster. It's got a bigger solar collector. But here's the big one, especially with sheep and cattle. You don't have your animals grazing on the ground. So the shorter you graze your plants down, what are they ingesting? Parasites. Parasites can't take sunlight, so they're buried down on that ground surface, and you're making your cows take your plants down to where they're an inch tall, and you wonder why your animals are wormy. They all got dirty tails, or the manure pats are real slimy looking. A real slimy looking manure pat. It's a good sign you got parasites, okay? Or too much protein. In the lambing season, we've got them bunched up. We don't go in there. The only time we go into the lambing area is to move a wire. Folks, these animals, all they need is protection. See, a sheep can't outrun a coyote. It can't kick, it can't bite. It just can't fight off a coyote. And so we give them guardian dogs. But I used to go in there in lambing season like that. And I'd be out there, there'd be a baby lamb, and I'd be grabbing it and trying. There's the mother right there. And I'd walk up, and the mother would run off, or who I thought was the mother. And that first year, I had 19 orphans. 19. And I'm like, man. So I called an old guy up. He's an old sheep farmer for 60 years. He said, Greg, stay out of there. He said, all you're doing is making orphans. I'm like, what? I'm trying to help them. He said, you're not helping anything. Leave them alone. So that's what we've done. So for 22 years now, we don't go back in the only time we go out there is to roll the wire up. That's it. We let the new mothers drift forward. Don't go out there and try and push the lambs through a gate. Let them drift forward. So we put a poly wires in front of them. The sheep are still getting to move, but we're not putting a fence up behind them. There's nothing back there, so there's no need to do that. So cattle plus sheep, that's a flirt right there. You got the best of both worlds. Sheep, they actually do improve cattle pasture in the sense that they take out a lot of the woodies, the thorn trees that we don't like seeing, the brushy stuff. Folks, there's an invasive in Missouri now. I don't know if you've got it in Tennessee, but it's called autumn olive. Do you all have autumn olive in Tennessee? It's a bad one. It'll take over. And once it gets going in your pastures, it's got these red berries on it, and the birds love them, and they just spread them everywhere. And once you get autumn olive started on your farm, it's pretty tough to get rid of. But these sheep, they kind of like them. They kind of like eating them. So we're getting rid of a lot of that woody stuff. Increasing cattle density also increases plant diversity. So people say with sheep, you can't build soil. They're not a big enough animal. Oh, yeah, they are. You know why? Sheep graze differently than cows because they walk a lot. And so most of the time we use a leader follower. We'll have the cattle in front and then we have the sheep behind. We tried running the sheep with the cattle, and we do that sometimes in lambing season. The bulls will be in there. You know, we got in spring with all the yearling bulls, there'll be 70 bulls. And they're out there with the sheep. But what we found out is on cattle drives, we walk cattle from one farm to the next. And so we may go 1.5 miles down a country road. Well, all of the neighbors have dogs. And all the dogs come out to the road and they'll bark at our cattle, which is not that big a deal, but it is when we have livestock guardian dogs in there that weigh 130 pounds. Fufu's dead. That's not a way to make good neighbors. I'm serious. These guardian dogs, they just don't take it. They just grab them. And they'll shake them, and before you can get over there, that dog is dead. Yeah. That's what they're bred to do, is protect your sheep. And when another dog comes in there, that's a predator. That's why I tell people, if you're going to run sheep and you got another dog at the house, a house dog, maybe it's a yard dog, you better make sure that that yard dog is bonded slowly onto your guardian dogs. We got 5 yard dogs, okay? 4 of them are retired guardian dogs, okay? When they get older at our house, they've earned the right to die on our farm. They work their tail off, barking and keeping all the predators away. We sleep good at night. And our sheep are 4 miles from our house. I don't worry about it. I just don't. We don't lose anything to predators. But if you bring a yard dog with you to check the sheep and it walks out in that pasture, that's not fair to those guard dogs. That's a predator. Especially if you have a dog that has a pointed ear. A pointed ear, like a healer, boy, that's a wolf. It's a coyote. You look at predators, they've got pointed ears. They don't have an ear that lays down like that. A pointed ear is a coyote. They're going to attack them. So I just say don't bring your pets in with you when you do the sheep. Go move the sheep, and then if you want to pet Rover or whatever, that's fine. We like building carbon-rich soil. So you just saw, I just came out of a talk down here that the guy was talking about building healthy soil, and he had some really good slides. And, I have found the best way to build healthy soil is with ruminant animals. Ruminants. So, you say, what do you want to plant? And I say, plant 4 hooves. Yep, plant 4 hooves. Folks, that soil right there, if you put a bean in it, it would go all the way to the moon. It's that healthy. It doesn't resist rain. It soaks it up like a sponge. And I get tickled. We just came out of a 2-year drought, and people, you go in town and filling up gas, and the guy goes, how much rain did you get? And I go, well, we got, 3/10 last night. And he goes, yeah, it wasn't enough to do any good. And I'm like, well, yeah, it was. And he'll say, well, it came so fast it all ran off. Well, that's his fault. Folks, if your pastures look like this stage, you don't have any litter on your ground. What am I talking about, this litter? Ground litter. Ground litter is the life of your farm. The first thing I do when I go into a farm, when I'm on a consulting trip, is I get out in the pasture and I get down on my knees and I look for that ground litter. And if you don't have a good established layer of ground litter on your farm, you're not going to make it through a drought. You've got to have that litter. That's what feeds the microbes and the earthworms. So I'm focusing every day when I feed the animals, I want them to trample some of that on the ground. So my ratio is 1/3 trampled, 1/3 left standing, and 1/3 through the animal. In a perfect world, that's what you're kind of shooting for. You're not going to hit it perfect every time. Don't worry about it. But that right there, that soil, you got the earthworms, you got the roots going through it. The soil looks like little pieces of vermiculite. It just falls apart in your hand. That's going to grow you a ton of grass. And it smells unbelievably good. We don't fence the ponds off for our sheep. Cattle, absolutely. We don't let cattle in ponds, only on limited skirts with rock. But sheep, they don't like water. They don't like water on their feet. And so our sheep are a really good crew. Folks, we've got 22 farms. I think we own 6 of those now. We got 15, 17, 16. We got 16 leased farms. Landowners, when they come out to go fishing, they don't want to be fighting briars. I don't want to be out there mowing them. You let them sheep in there, they'll keep that area clean around the pond. You don't have to mow it, and they can fish without hanging up their lure. It looks nice. Again, you're in the landscaping business. You want your place to look nice. Sometimes we even have to brush hog. Somebody said the other day, why are you brush hogging that field? I said, well, I've had that farm leased for 21 years. Yep, had it leased for 21 years. Guess what I pay him a year for it? Nothing. Yep. Folks, people get emotionally attached to the land. If you take good care of it, they don't want to lose you. Now, that landowner, we let them buy a cow in our herd. So now they're a rancher, okay? They're not just a landowner, they're a rancher. And you can do that. You can allow somebody, if you're going out to get a lease, I just talked to a young couple here from Indiana. They got a lease. And it's a pretty darn good lease. And they gave him a beef. The guy needed a deduction for the agricultural exemption on his taxes. They gave him a beef. Now they got a farm. That's worth a lot. Okay? That's the sheep in the wintertime. We do get snow. That's probably the worst snow we've got. Well, that was in 2019. We got 26 inches in one night. And so we went out. I just took a tractor and made a windrows in the snow, and the sheep went through it and got the grass. We didn't feed any hay. That's the thing about sheep. Our sheep won't eat hay. Now, if you give them alfalfa, they would eat that. But my deal is you can't afford to feed alfalfa to a sheep. Okay? It's too expensive. They would much rather be out grazing. A sheep's like a horse in the aspect that they use their feet. They'll pull the snow back and they'll eat. A cow won't do that. A cow will take her head or a bowl and they'll push through the snow. But sheep are actually better in deep snow than cattle are. Just don't worry about them. Oh, and the other thing nice about sheep in the winter, you don't need to give them any water. When it gets below 30 degrees, our sheep don't get any water. Now, why is that? They're grazing. There's moisture in that winter stockpile. I gave them water for a week when I first got our sheep. And every morning I'd go out there, the water would just be frozen. And I'm like, what's wrong with you girls? Why won't you drink? So I'd chop the ice off, fill it back up. Next morning it'd be froze again. I'm like, all right. So I called my old buddy up, and he said, Greg, they don't drink water when they're grazing. I'm like, why didn't you tell me that? So I don't give them water anymore. The guard dogs, they're in there with them. They'll go to a pond or a creek. They'll find water. But the sheep, now if you put sheep in a dry lot and you feed them hay, you've got to give them water because there's no moisture in hay. We do guardian dogs on the sheep. Folks, I know people that use guardian mules, and they've kind of got, or donkeys, they've kind of got by with it for a while. And then I was going to use llamas. I wanted to use llamas so bad I could taste it. And that's because on a llama, they eat the same grass as the sheep. I wouldn't have to mess with the dog. Just turn the llamas in with the sheep and go home and don't worry about it. Well, so I'm doing investigative, and I call this guy, and he's like, Greg, he said, let me give him a llama story. So he had 8 llamas in with 750 ewes. And they went to Tulsa that night to a picture show. And they decided to spend the night at the hotel. They had a nice meal, and they spent the night instead of going back to the ranch. They got back the next morning about 10 o'clock in the morning, and there was 350 dead ewes. Yeah. There was 200 that had their big flaps of skin ripped off of them. They had to shoot those. What happened was a group of wild neighboring dogs all got together in a pack, and they came through those sheep, and they just started ripping. And he had 8 llamas, big llamas. Every llama ran to the barn and saved their own hide. They were still there when he got home. You know what he told me? He said, Greg, you know how much guard dog, do you know how much guard dog I could have bought for 500 and some dead sheep? I'm like, a lot. He goes, enough to last me my whole lifetime. So his parting words to me was, if you're guarding against fangs, put some fangs out there with a white coat on them where they look like a sheep. And get dogs that'll stay with your sheep. Marima. We like the crosses of 1/3 Marima. 1/2 Marima, a 1/4 Anatolian, and a 1/4 Pyrenees. I love that blend. We've been using those for 20 years now. They live with the sheep. They lay down in the middle of the sheep. You won't find them on the road, and you're not going to find them at your neighbor's. We had Pyrenees starting out. Every one of them got killed. Every single one of them got hit on the road. Now, why were they out there on that road? It's because they were marking their territory. That's what Pyrenees do. They keep spreading. They'll pee on the corners of your farm to mark it against predators. The next day, they're pissing on your neighbor's corner. And the next day, they're in Nashville pissing on that corner. They just keep spreading. And the dumbest thing in the world on a highway is a guardian dog. They're just dumb. They just stand there and take it. Like, what's that coming at? Done. So if you're going to feed a dog, get it raised up, and it's kind of doing its thing, and then it gets hit, you just wasted 2 years of dog feed. How many dogs do you need to guard sheep? 2. I like 2. Now, if you got a small homestead and you don't have a big area to guard, you can do 1. But here's the deal I'm going to share with you all. If you've got a good dog, a young dog, and it's not killing the sheep, it's not harassing the lambs, chewing on their ears, making life miserable for them, get you a puppy. Get you a puppy and put him with that older dog. That older dog will train that puppy to be a good guarding dog. And now, what have you got? Well, you got something you can sell. Anybody priced a good trained guard dog lately? $2,500 to $3,500. So I'm looking at it this way. Why can't you sell maybe a trained dog every couple of years? In other words, that dog's guarding your sheep, but he still also be training a younger one. Always keep a young dog out there. That's something you can sell. What if your dog does die? It happens. You've got a backup. So, do they eat quite a bit of feed? They do in the wintertime. They'll eat more feed, but in the summertime, they don't hardly, they just don't eat much feed. It's hot. They're not out there. The cold weather is what takes all the calories to keep a guard dog. They just consume more calories. So there's the bulls. There's the bulls with the sheep, 1 12-inch wire. So how do you keep bulls in on a 12-inch wire? Well, when those bulls were born on the farm as baby calves, they learned what hot wire was. And so we grazed the bulls right next to the sheep flock for 2 days. And the dogs would bark at them. They did not like those bulls at all. They thought they were predators, but they couldn't get to them because of the fence. Because we had 3 wires. No, we had 4. We had 4 wires between the guard dogs and the bulls. So we finally turned the sheep in with the bulls. And those dogs took off after those 75 bulls, just running them around that paddock. The only thing that kept them in was that one single wire. And I'm like, well, it looks like we're going to be getting in some bulls. Well, they only made 1 round, and they came back, and the bulls, they kind of sat down. Their tongues were hanging out. And the dogs, their tongues were hanging out. They were hot. And like, well, this kind of sucks. And they just sat down and looked at each other. And that was it. That was it. They never bothered each other the rest of the summer. We ran pigs. We ran pigs and cows, sheep and horses together, and goats, all 4. And that was an experience. Do you know horses hate pigs? They chase them pigs around that field just booking, man. Them pigs are squealing, and the horses are biting them and farting and kicking. And finally the pig's like, you know what? We're not going to run one more step. And all the pigs got into a circle, and they faced out toward the horses, and every time a horse would run in and he and kick and fart, they stand there like that. And the horses couldn't get them to move. I'm like, well, I'm going to go back to the house. I'll check on y'all tomorrow. So I went back to the house. I came back the next morning to move the cows and the sheep and the horses and the pigs. And there was a horse grazing, and there was a pig right next to him. They'd worked it out. Like, okay, you're not going to kill me. You're okay. But if I'd have taken those pigs out immediately, they never would have worked it out. It does help to have tough pigs. A normal pig, those horses would have killed them. They'd have just died of heat exhaustion. We like using poly wire We use a lot of poly to manage our herds, whether it's sheep. You can do the same thing with sheep. So what we've got here, folks, is a lane, and we've got poly wire on each side of that. And we call these exclusion zones. So what you're doing is you're using the power of the foot. This is called animal impact. Animals bunched closely together don't watch where they place their feet. They don't. That's a different kind of impact than grazing. This is what the buffalo did. When the predators and the lions and the grizzly bears and the wolves came after the large herds of buffalo and they stampeded, this is what they did. They laid all the grass flat on the ground. There's an energy field, whether it's sheep or cattle, there's an energy field around each individual animal. And when animals run, they get excited and run because you've got them up tight. If you come back to that area right there in 60 days, it's going to look a whole lot different than this over here. It'll be greener, it'll be thicker, and it's going to have a higher bricks. It's going to have higher bricks. So it's caused an exclusion zone. All you got to do is use polywire, make a small paddock, and move them up and down it a few times, and then give them a normal-sized paddock for the day. So if you're going to go out and move your animals in the morning, give them a small area, let them beat that up, and then move them onto a normal-sized paddock. Manure, urine, and animal impact, that's what you're trying to do. This is some of the silvopasture that we've developed. Folks, I just had a young man there, it was Thursday, came in from Nova Scotia, and he's got a lot of timber in Nova Scotia, and he's like, I don't know if I can turn it to grass. I said, well, look at this. Well, anyway, this was in a drought, but I took him in there when we walked out in there. Folks, the grass was that tall. That's orchard grass. That used to be oak leaves. That was oak leaves. So I went in and tied ribbons on our best trees. We probably cut, just in that 5 acres right there, we probably cut 400 trees out of there. Got some lumber, we got some firewood, and we got a ton of shiitake mushrooms, logs. So we sell shiitake mushrooms. We've got 3,000 logs now that are inoculated, and it's a result of this. We're getting a lot of trees, and what do you do with the trees? You can only sell so much firewood. I say grow food on them. Why not grow some food? The beautiful thing about shiitakes is if you've got an area around your house that's shaded, and you can go in there and inoculate those logs. You never have to inoculate them again. And they'll last anywhere from 7 to 10 years. Every time it rains, go out there and check them. How many's ever ate a shiitake mushroom growing on an oak log? Folks, they'll blow away what you buy at the store. They're really, really, really good. And they're medicinal. They're finding out that some of these mushrooms, especially lion's mane, reishi. Reishi's a good one. Reishi actually fights Alzheimer's. My brother raises reishis. He's got a mushroom house now. He grows mushrooms 365 days of the year. But how many trees are enough to cut down? That's a good question. If you want more trees, in other words, you're focused on having more lumber, you want your spacing closer together. If you want to raise forage, which we are, we're a grazing farm, I'm going to take out more trees. So my spacing is this. When I cut a tree down, the tree that I leave, I want to make sure that that tree has sunlight to the forest floor all the way around it. If it doesn't, you've got too many trees. And on white oaks, you need to have about 100-foot spacing. And what we're finding out now, thanks to Jay Russell, you all have heard of Jay Russell. He was the old forester back in the early 1900s. He talks about the biggest mismanagement in timber, he thought, in the United States, was people weren't managing their white oak trees. You manage a white oak tree, you are going to get tons of acorns. And in Missouri, the white oak is the most sought after there is. I mean, they use it for cabinets, flooring, veneer, any kind of veneer, it's white oak. Whiskey staves for the whiskey barrels, white oak. So These are worth a lot of money. There's some of the hair sheep. They slick off. So why did we pick hair sheep over wool sheep? Well, I'm not going to shear. And folks, the shearing's gotten so bad around us that it costs $7 to get one sheared, and you get $1.50 for the wool. So that's not a real good trade-off. It takes 25% of what a sheep eats to grow wool. So why would you be wanting to grow 25% of your forage? You're putting it in a product that's going to cost you money to get off. So we're going to go with hair sheep. Hair sheep shed off. They seem to be more parasite resistant than the wool sheep do. What breed are we using? St. Croix, crossed onto Katahdin. Some people go for Dorpers. If you can make Dorpers work for you, go for it. We couldn't, because we're not going to worm. We don't worm our sheep, ever. We brought Dorpers in. We wanted to go for that bigger carcass. They make a nice carcass. They do. And they sell good. Every one of our Dorpers died the first year. So I say a live St. Croix is better than a dead Dorper. Make sure that you buy your sheep from somebody that hasn't babied them. Go onto their farm. Look at their pastures. If their pastures are nubbed down really, really, really short, you probably don't want to buy those sheep. And that's because they're worming them to keep them alive. They are. If they stop worming them, them sheep are going to die. Winter, those sheep are fat as ticks. They are. They haven't had a bite of grain. We don't give our sheep any grain. Remember this. When you feed a ruminant animal grain, it grows hoof and it grows horn. Yep. So if you like trimming feed on sheep, feed them grain. They'll grow a great big old hoof. And now you got to get out there and start trimming that. That's not any fun. I've never trimmed one, but it's not any fun, I don't think. It doesn't look like a lot of fun. You see our dog there? Look at that dog. She's hard at work, isn't she? That's what they do in the daytime. They sleep. But I promise you, you don't want to walk into that paddock at night in the dark without me being with you. She's going to have her hackles raised up, and she's going to be charging, barking. Now, she's not going to bite you, but she's going to come up and circle you, and the whole time she's barking ferociously. Get out of here. Get. That's what she's saying in dog talk. Leave my sheep alone. That's what they do. That's what they're supposed to do, is bark all night long. So if you live close to neighbors, be careful. You might have some neighbors calling you, like, I wish you'd shut that dog up. Yeah. So if you have sheep in netting, you probably don't need a guard dog. But netting gets very labor intensive to move. It's just heavy and it's expensive. I think they sell it in 160-foot rolls. You know, it can get into some money pretty quick. We have a corral system. They're just walked in. Our sheep are trained to, I don't have a border collie. We want to move the sheep. I just go sheep, 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 and here they come. And the first ones in are the dogs. The dogs come in first, and the sheep are trained. If the dogs go, it must be safe. Yep. That's our South Pole cow herd. That's in the late fall. I'm sorry, late winter. It's just coming spring. We move our cows 3 times a day in the growing season. Let me give you all a little tip. And this works for sheep too. We move our cows at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we used to move them at 5 o'clock at night. And Ian was there a couple years ago and he's like, guys, you got to get more energy in your cattle. You got to get more energy. What's he talking about? He's talking about that bricks meter. Getting the sugar content higher in your blade of grass. So how do you do that? You graze, you move them at 1 o'clock, between 1 and 3 o'clock. Move those animals. They go out and they eat that high bricks grass and they just get fat. They get pig fat. Okay? Let me tell you something. So this last year we did it in 2023. We started moving them 3 times a day. And what Isaac, my farm manager, caught on to was those cows, instead of laying in the shade ruminating, so you move them at 8 o'clock, they fill up, they'll lay there in the shade just chewing their cud, and then they get moved again at 5 o'clock that night. Well, they're in the shade, they're exposed to flies, because they've all pooped underneath the tree. You get those cows up, and they go move, or sheep, and they go move. They're getting this huge influx of energy. Folks, we didn't have one single case of pink eye last year. It's the first time it's ever happened. Not one single case out of 400 head of cows. Not one case. Why was that? Super functioning immune system. Here's the other thing. We turned the bulls in last year, July 1st. All the calving was done in 20 days. Never had that happen. Yep, 20 days. Folks, those cows were cycling so well because they're getting all that energy. They're getting that, I call it that Hershey candy bar at 1 o'clock. A lot of sugar. And those females were cycling. Now, this would be an April, May born calf. So if you want April, May calving, you want to turn your bulls in the 1st of July. This year, we're looking at leaving the bulls in for 45 days. Ian says in Africa, any wild animal that doesn't calve or drop its young in 21 days gets eaten by a lion. Nature just takes them out. Now, why is that? Why would something that doesn't breed in 21 days get eaten by a lion? Anybody? They get fat. They get fat because they didn't breed. They're not doing nothing. And so that wildebeest gets fat. Well, when the lions come in to chase them, the fat one can't outrun the lion. That's the way it works. Everybody says nature is really gentle. No, she's not. She's cruel. She kills your ass. That's what happens. She just kills you. Well, she doesn't pour Ivomec down your back. That's what we do in the United States. If we get an animal that doesn't work, we just pour Ivomec down and we feed them a lot of grain. In Africa, they just get killed. So I asked Ian, I said, in your calving season, how do you handle your calving? Oh, he said, I go down to my beach house for a month. I'm like, what? I'm like, what do you mean? He said, yeah. He said, they only die one time. And then I'm like, oh. And he said, yeah, we did that 30 years ago. Now it's not a problem. So the ones that couldn't produce died. Maybe with a calf sticking out, whatever, but they died. And now those genes are gone. Yep. It's amazing how we, another thing I'll share with y'all, on your bull calves, same with rams. You know, the typical procedure is when the baby calf is born, it's easy to catch him, throw him on his belly when he's a couple days old, maybe hours old, and you castrate him. Because he's small, he doesn't even realize he's been castrated. You spray a little screw worm in there to keep the flies off it, and you're done. And Ian was there in the spring, and he's like, why are you doing something stupid like that for? He's really blunt, you know. I'm like, well, Ian, I thought I was doing the right thing. He said, no. He said, God gave him testicles, testosterone, to put on weight. And you come along with a knife and cut them out. He said, then 120 days later, you get the little booger down, and you put a growth implant in his ear to make him put weight on. How does that make sense? He said, leave the nuts on. So when do we castrate? We castrate at 10 to 11 months. So we're going to leave the nuts on till they're 10 to 11 months. Folks, you can tell by then if it's a bull that you want to keep. How many times have you castrated a baby calf, and he gets out there, you're going, gosh darn it, I wish I'd have left him a bull. He's a nice-looking animal. But you took his knickers off, and now he can't breed. You got to steer. Same way with ram lambs. If you castrate a ram lamb and you take him to the sale barn, he's always going to be, a wither is always going to be a little bit thinner and not as heavy as a ram, an intact ram lamb. The other thing, you've taken yourself out of a market when you sell them in the fall. Most Muslims will not buy a castrated ram. They want an unblemished lamb. Okay, so rams grow good intact. If you got a place you can put them, let me talk about that a little bit. People say, well, Greg, you're lucky. You lease these farms. You know, you're getting these leases and such. No, I'm keeping my eyes out all the time. And I'm interested in 5 acres. If it's close enough that I can haul animals to it in my trailer and I can get there in, let's say, 5 to 10, 15 minutes, sign me up. I'm interested because that's the place I could put my rams. Folks, you got to get the rams out of your ewes. Unless you've got a very small herd, a very small area, and you live in Tennessee, I wouldn't be too afraid to leave my rams in here because they're not going to freeze to death in the winter. If you start lambing here in December, January, you're probably going to be okay. In Missouri, that's a dead lamb. It is. It's going to freeze to death. So if you live in an area where it's cold, put the rams in. Well, we put ours in December 1st. So we're wanting to lamb on pasture when it's warm. When it's warm out. I don't want to lamb in a barn. We don't have a barn. I don't have a barn for the cattle. I don't have one for the sheep. And if you put animals in a barn, shame on you. I'm serious. It's the worst thing you can do to an animal. Because you get them all in there, they all get hot. They're pooping and peeing in there. You talk about a bunch of nasty place to get a disease. That's where you're going to get them. Leave them out where the sun is. Clean grass is the best medicine you can give an animal. Daily rotation on clean grass. I love that picture. You know why I love that picture? Because that was the soybean field. Glyphosate, every year, nuked it, atrazine, tilled it. Insecticide, pesticide, herbicide, just nuked it. That was 23 years ago that they did that. For the last 20, it's looked like that with animals. Folks, we can heal the land. Everybody says, oh, the animals are destroying the land. No, they are not. It's the way they're being used. It's not the animal's fault. We got to get them back out on the land. This is the materials we use. I use geared reels and O'Brien step-in post. I want to use the best. I want them to stay put. I don't want to be out there chasing animals. I started out with a 5-gallon bucket. Had poly wire wrapped around it. I can't believe I did that, but I did. Poor man's got poor ways. You know, use what you got. I got geared reels now. We got O'Brien step-ins, and we're moving these animals. In the wintertime, we're always moving. We're still moving twice a day in the wintertime. Why are we moving them twice a day in the wintertime when the grass isn't growing? Why are we doing that? It's because we're keeping them on clean ground. You're constantly keeping them on clean ground. You're not going to have to worm your animals. Folks, if you're worming your animals, you're not going to have any dung beetles. The worms do not like Ivermectin-infected cow pats. So when you start pouring all this stuff down your animals or injecting the sheep, drenching them with wormer, all that ends up in the manure and the urine. The very most valuable asset we have coming out of that herbivore is the manure and the urine, and you're poisoning it. And the fertilizer companies are laughing all the way to town with your money because now they know your soil is broke. They know you got to come back to buy chemical fertilizer. You're not going to grow anything. Ian calls it you're a drug addict. You've got your soil broken where it's dependent on that chemical fertilizer. You can't do that. We do cattle drives and sheep. This particular drive, we don't have any neighbors with dogs. But the cattle are always in the front, and the sheep will be at the back. And the guard dogs have got a truce now with the cows. They're not chasing them. And those are all bulls. Yep, one wire makes it nice. We're going to get back to that one of these days. We're at 2 right now, again, because of the goats. The sheep are really easy to move. I thought we would need a border collie, but you don't need a border collie. Just teach them, when you go out there and you make a call, they come. And if nothing else, get the dog where they'll come. They'll always follow the dogs. People said you can't grow clover with sheep. The sheep will graze the clover out of your pasture. That is a bald-faced lie. You can grow great clover with sheep, but you got to move them. You got to move them. So, folks, when you're getting a new homestead and there hasn't been any animals on it, the number one thing you want to do is put your perimeter fence in. Get a perimeter fence on so you can keep them on your farm. The next thing you want to do is get a water source out there. You don't want to be carrying water to your animals. And that can be as simple as going and buying a roll of high-density polyethylene, 3/4-inch pipe, and laying out on top of the ground. In Tennessee, it's not going to freeze probably till January. I don't know. If you're concerned about it freezing, bury it. Put it down about a foot. But these quick couplers they have today, they're awesome. I saw Timeless Fences got them over there in his stand. It's called the Plasson quick coupler. They're $15. They work like an air hose. The minute you plug into one of those to your stock tank, there's water coming out. And then you put a valve on it, the Job Megaflow, which is the best pressurized valve made, and you don't have to worry about water anymore. You just move the water with your sheep or your cows. You don't want to be carrying water if you don't have to. This is the breed that was actually developed down your all's way. This is Teddy Gentry's. Teddy's the Alabama singer here in Alabama. Teddy developed a South Pole breed. They are a quarter Red Angus, a quarter Hereford, a quarter Centipole, and a quarter Barzona. And there's actually a South Pole booth. It's right back over there somewhere. And go talk to those people. There's breeders here in Tennessee. There's breeders in Alabama. There's breeders all over. But you can go over there and they can hook you up with a breeder in your state. They're good cattle. They're focused on grass. We have bylaws. You don't feed grain to a South Pole. Oh, and you can't show a South Pole in a county fair. We don't want the judges getting a hold of these. We don't. Because the next thing you know, they'll be this tall. And they'll be, big old cows. You don't want that. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop there on that. Mineral, we use free choice mineral. That's what that is. The cattle get to select which mineral they want, and they poop it back out into the land. We do the same thing with the sheep. Over time, those minerals are redistributed out on the land exactly what's missing. We can't do that, but a ruminant can. Water tanks, that's our portable water. And that little tank is only 40 gallons, but it'll water 300 head of cattle. Now, it's 10 gallons a minute pressure. You might be saying, what's those little rings for on the ground? Very important, especially down here in Tennessee when it's raining a lot. Folks, all that is the sidewall of a tractor tire or a combine tire, but the animals stand on that, and they take their head out of the drink, and the water drips right there by their feet. You're going to have a mud pit there if you got soft ground. Keep those around your water tank. You can move them in 24 hours. There won't be any mud. Mud kills daily gains. Don't get mud on your farm. We do that. So on our ponds, we've got rock skirts, limited access. So the animals have to stand on the rock to get them a drink. I don't want them cattle in that pond. They're going to poop in there, and they're going to pee in there, and then you've ruined your water. Did y'all know that animals are about 75% water? And you're making them drink junk? Not a good way to make a living. Learn to look for slick-hided animals. If you don't know anything about cows, look for one that looks like that. Very slick-hided, no winter hair coat, big old gut, nice gut. Look at the udder on that cow. You want little bitty teats on your cows. A great big teat, when she calves, it's going to get huge, and the calf can't suck it. Well, now you got to get her up and milk her out, and you need to get rid of that cow. It's going to get worse every year. And her daughter is going to be the same way. Pretty good chance. Get rid of her too. Look at that cow. That's what they used to look like. You think she's an easy keeper? Remember, short legs, big gut. I bet that cow can look at grass and get fat. There's a nice slick-hided bull. I like a bull that has slick hide, nice chest and neck, the wrinkles on the neck, a really tight sheath on his belly. You don't want a big old long hairy sheath hanging down on your bull. That's going to get cockleburrs and dirt in it. It's an inferior trait. Okay. Yeah, I had to put the opposite in there. I hope that guy isn't in the crowd. If he is, I'm sorry. Folks, you can't do grass-fed beef with that. You can feed that animal. If you didn't feed it, it's never going to get fat. Look at the legs on that little thing. There's what you want. That's a steer. That's our tools. We have a four-wheeler we use every day. We load it down with all the reels and the posts. We've even got a bar here on the front that allows us to drive over the fence without getting off. So we can drive right over electric fence. It's a really cool tool. Yep. This is a perfect picture. I want to put that in there. So we got a ton of carbon. Folks, you can't get enough carbon trampled on the ground. If you've got a neighbor that's got a bunch of old big round bales and you just bought a place and you want to build your soil up, go see if you can get that hay. See if you can get it. If it'll hold together to get up on a trailer, bring it over to your farm and unroll that with your tractor, whatever. Any way you can do to spread it out, and then lock cows in there or sheep, make them work that over with their feet, and you're going to grow some really good grass there the next year, okay? Isaac got onto this. In really cold weather, we unroll hay in a circle now. Why do we do it in a circle? Wind. You got a perfect night. Them cows just cycle around that circle all night, and they stay warm. Yeah, that's what you want. Solely on grass, they should stay fat. Folks, we don't wean. We don't wean the calves until March. So an April, May born calf, the mother takes it through the winter. So we're putting pressure on those cows. Not all cows can do it. And what you're doing when you do that is you're weaning out the high milking cows. The cows that give a lot of milk are going to be thin by March 1st. Get rid of them. Those are high milk producing cows. You don't want a cow that gives a ton of milk. Not a beef cow, because milk is hard to produce on grass. You want a cow that'll give enough milk, get that calf going. Okay? A high milking cow is going to get thin on you. She's going to be late breeding back for her second calf. You don't want that. You want fat. You got to have fat on the carcass. Everybody's, oh, grass-fed beef. You want lean. No, you don't. Fat. Fat's where the flavor is. You saw Joel dressing that chicken in there today. He made sure that he kept that cavity fat on that carcass when he tucked those legs under there. That's where the flavor's at. Yep. This cow was farting a lot and ruined the environment, so I ate it. You're welcome. Be a hero. Eat meat. Thank you. Thank you all. I'll take a few questions if y'all have got any. Yes, ma'am. Where am I sourcing the minerals? How do we move the minerals with the cow and the sheep? That mineral feeder is built by Free Choice Enterprises out of Wisconsin. And they build it. It's a 16-hole mineral. Actually, it's an 18-hole mineral feeder. And it's got 4x4 runners on it. You put a log chain on it. You just drag it from paddock to paddock to paddock. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, so on a herd that big, 150 to 200 pairs, how big of an area should I give them? Boy, that's a $64,000 question. In the springtime, here's the ratio, folks. Fast growth, fast moves. Slow growth, slow them down. Well, how do you slow them down? You give them a smaller area so it takes longer to get through your farm. In the spring, the grass is trying to put a seed head on. You're trying to keep the seed head off with your grazing management. So you got to give them a bigger area and you move them quicker, okay? How big of an area do you give them? I like to look at it this way. When I go out there to move my cows, I don't have time to put all the slides up. That's a whole nother talk, but look at your polywire out in your paddock. If those cattle have reached under that poly wire and grazed it the full length of that paddock underneath it, you didn't give them a big enough area. If the cows are bawling at you when you go out there to move them, that's a red flag. When you take the poly wire down to move them, they all go charging through like they're starving to death. Look for the death triangle. I wish I had time to show you that. If you hang around, I can show you up here on the computer, but it's on the left-hand side of the animal. So there's a big indentation between the hip bone and the rib. If it's sunken in like a cereal bowl right there, it's only on the left side of the animal. You should have been there sooner. You should have moved those cows sooner. You limited them. Folks, if you get in a habit of limiting your cows, they're not going to breed. They're not. Do you all know what the highest cost on a cow calf operation is? Anybody? Come on. Somebody said, hey. Somebody over here said what? When they don't get pregnant. Boy, you all are sharp. Either that or you're good YouTube followers. I don't know which. They're right. The cow that doesn't breed back, you go to pregnancy check in the fall and she doesn't have a calf in her. Why doesn't she have a calf in her? That's your fault. You pushed her too hard. You didn't give her enough to eat. Folks, when you push them too hard and you limit them, the pH in the gut goes to 9. The pH goes to 9. They won't even cycle. They won't even cycle. That's your fault. You didn't give them enough to eat. You wonder why you got 20% open cows in the fall. It's because you didn't give them enough to eat. So don't do that. These are all great questions. Yes, ma'am. Yes. The question is, do I have a website? greenpasturesfarm.net. I got one better than that, though. Hit the YouTube channel. I put out 5 videos a week. It's called Greg Judy Regenerative Rancher. Greg Judy Regenerative Rancher. And make sure you hit the subscribe button. Just kidding. No, I'm not. Yes, sir. What do I do about animals not respecting the wire? Shoot them. No, I do. I shoot the sheep and eat them. You got to take care of the sheep. If you got a sheep that just runs through your wire, get rid of the darn thing, because all it's going to do is train all your sheep to be bad ones. They'll all be getting out. Cows, if they're not respecting your wire, check the voltage. You need to have 8,000 to 10,000 volts in there. I like to use poly braid. A lot of people use poly wire. Folks, poly braid is twice as conductive. Don't use steel in your fencing system. If you got a lot of steel posts out there and you can't keep your fence hot, it's because you got ground rods everywhere. Use those timeless posts over there or fiberglass or something. Don't use steel in your fencing system. I don't have any problem with it. We have power every year that goes out in the winter, typically 2 or 3 days for a whole stretch. That's how long it takes to get the lines back up. We don't have any power. Cows don't get out because the last time they touched it, it knocked them into next week. Folks, hot wire is a psychological fence. It's not a physical fence. Did you have a question? Yes.
How do you manage shade if you're moving your cattle at noon?
Yeah, how do you manage shade if you're moving your cows at noon? They can have shade. If they're sitting in the trees, you're just moving a wire, letting them go and graze. They can come back to that tree if they want. Okay? But the key is they will leave that shade to go eat because they know they're going to get a candy bar. Yeah. Get that energy in them. That grass between 1 and 3 o'clock, folks, it's unbelievably good for you. And if you work 40 hours a week in town, you can't be out there at noon. You can still move them. Go get you a bat latch. It'll pay for itself in probably a month. A bat latch, just an automatic gate opener. Yep, you can put those up, and it's on a spring. You can set it for 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, and that spring goes flying open, and you're at work, or you're taking care of your kids or whatever. You don't need to go out there to move them. They'll move themselves, and they get trained to that thing. Yep. All right, any other questions? Yes, sir. What are we doing? What? Water on leased properties. That's the question? Yep. Water and lease properties. If I don't have water, I'll build a pond. But I got to have a 7-year lease. I'm not interested in even talking to you unless you give me 7 years. I can build a pond on your farm for about $1,700 to $1,800. You're not going to be able to go skiing on it, but it's going to be deep. I'm going to make her deep, and I'm going to put one of them rock skirts on it so my cows can't get in the water. And folks, on leased land, I stock them. I put fish in them because landowners have children. They have relatives. What do they like to fish? Put some fish in there for them. It doesn't cost that much to do that. That's another service that you can provide. If I'm going to lease a farm and I can't get a pond built that doesn't have any good draws or such, I'm going to check out the rural water line. Find out what the water meter is, if you can get one on that property. There might already be one there. See what it costs per 1,000 before you hook onto it. Because cows drink a lot of water. You know, they're not like a sheep. Yes, ma'am.
I'm fairly new to beef cattle, and I've had a couple of people tell me that I should never put my calves out, that they should be on grain and milk.
Yeah, so the question is, she's got several head of beef cows, and she shouldn't put them out on grass. They should be on grain and milk. Yeah, there's a guy came through the Amish and said the same thing. He said, when your cows calve, 1 blade of grass is too much. He told the Amish that. He gave them all a steak. He had a steak dinner. He was a feed salesman. And those Amish are looking at you like, what do you mean 1 blade of grass is too much? Well, he wanted to buy grain. Folks, a baby calf doesn't need grain. It needs the milk and it needs the grass. We were looking Thursday before I left. There was baby calves out there that were 7 to 10 days. They were eating grass just like their mothers. It doesn't matter what? No, it doesn't matter the breed at all. The sooner you can get a young calf eating grass, folks, the less chance of scours. Absolutely. Get a little roughage in that gut. You're not going to have any scours. And the other thing, folks, mud. Mud brings scours. If you see mud developing, you got a rain last night, and you just moved them into a new paddock, and you're going to be on that paddock 3 more days, but they made mud back here. Put a wire around it. Don't let them little baby calves get in there. They get that mud all their feet, and now you're going to be getting scours. That's what brings scours is mud. And scours is really, it can go through your herd. And you'll lose some calves on that. Yep. Learn to hate mud. All right, any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so the question is there a cattle to sheep ratio that works best? I'm going to say, well, let me just say this. You can't, there's a phrase out there, I just want y'all to hear it, and it's not true. You can put 1 sheep in every herd of cow. For every cow you've got, you can put a sheep in there and never miss the forage. That is not true. I'm telling you straight up, that's just the way I am. It's not true. The sheep will compete. They'll eat some of that clover, and they're going to eat some of that grass. So I would put in, let's say you had 10 cows, I'd put in probably 2 to 3 sheep. For every 10 cows, maybe 2 to 3 sheep. Now, if you like sheep and you're on a small farm, let's say you got 7 acres and you want to steer for your freezer, it'd be the other way around. You know, remember this. Every cow unit is 1,000 pounds, okay? That's what a cow unit is, an animal unit. 1,000 pounds of weight. So if a ewe weighs 150 pounds, take 1,000 and divide it by 150. How many ewes is that? 7, roughly? 6 or 7? So you can run, for every cow that you can run on your farm, if you took one off, you could add 6 sheep. That's where I'm going with that. Yes, ma'am. Oh, she's telling me to shut it up. I'm not watching over. That's Jan, my wife. She's doing this. Wrap it up. This guy's probably ready for me to shut up too. Folks, I'm going to be up here. Thank you all. If anybody has any other questions, I'll stay around a little bit.